Hi, Mark Pearson, Executive and Artistic Director of the College Light Opera Company, coming to you from upstage left at the Highfield Theater. Welcome to Backstage, a week in review of work being done by our talented design and production students. Let's see what they've been working on.
Kristen Knutson, Production Manager and Technical Director. This week's design and production focus is centered on props. Working in teams, these company members have selected musicals from Clock's repertoire, picked 2 or 3 characters from within each piece, and imagined hypothetical personal belongings one might find in those characters' pockets or bags. The objects are not necessarily named props from the script, but items that might hold personal value and reveal something from the character's past or personality. In this episode, you will also see some snippets from Design and Production's workshop discussion with 2 Clock alumni who were very active on Broadway, production property supervisor Buste Bigley, and scenic designer John Lee Beatty. Please enjoy this week's presentation of Backstage.
My name's Buste, he, him. I am a prop master working in New York. I work on Broadway. I've opened about 50 shows. I had 9 shows running in North America before COVID hit. I've been in my first show on Broadway was Rock of Ages in 2008. So I've been working on Broadway for about 12 years. And when this season I did Tina, the Tina Turner musical, Moulin Rouge, and I'm working on the Moulin on Broadway, and the Moulin Rouge tour was what I'm working on as things slowed down or stopped. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, I did that show on Broadway, and we had a production in San Francisco, and Dear Evan Hansen that's on Broadway and on tour and in the West End. We closed a Toronto production a few months ago. I did Frozen for Broadway, that's now closed. I was on a Facebook page with all the Frozen people, and they are loading out the show during the pandemic, and they're the first show to do that. And the album is called Dethawing. I thought that was funny.
John Lee Beatty, I think my first job at Clock was 51 years ago. So I've been designing scenery for 51 years, I guess. Actually before that, and I was in 2nd grade. I was the only kid who did scenery in 2nd grade, obviously. But I'm extremely prolific Broadway designer. I've done 116, 17 Broadway shows, and I've been his huge, equally busy regional theater and off Broadway. I've done, I'm sure you've seen one of my shows, especially Chicago, but for the scenery and for the props, and I sort of have to sign off on that. And it sounded reasonable, a little on the shy side, but just barely like we could do it. It's extremely expensive though, because it's a classy hotel room, far classier than the sketch would let you know, but it's quite expensive. So we're always dealing with budget all the time. And Buste, you could chime in, but Buste's job is also to look at this. Some of this is kind of sketchy and vague, but he sort of has to look me over and sort of figure out what my taste is. And you were really good about second guessing me on the wall sconces. What did you do? You showed me 3 different versions of wall sconces that fit the budget and you thought were something I would sort of like, or how did you do that?
What did I do? I know that you like lampshades, and that you like a pretty lampshade. So whenever you can, get something, and I think what we ended up doing, they had a shield, right?
Yeah.
And but also like the Plaza Hotel logo looks kind of like a shield, and I thought that was it would make it.
Oh right, yeah.
Look kind of like the thing you were going for.
Right. We did look for the Plaza Hotel. The director was really turned on by the logo being on the towels and the napkins, even though you couldn't really see them. but he loved that kind of stuff. So we thought that putting logos on anything possible was good. So we kept the Plaza logo in mind as we worked along. In fact, Casey Hultgren from Clock ended up 3D printing the logo onto the door,
And on the trash can.
And on the trash can and on the fire screen, we put the logo of the shop. There we are at Hudson Scenic Studios. And you're basically seeing scenery without props. But they've sent, you see little blue tape on the crisscrosses on the wallpaper. The wallpaper is actually fabric from the fabric store because it looks better on stage to use something light absorptive than something harsh. But the X's, the props had to send the wall sconces up to the shop so they could pre-wire the holes into the wall for those sconces. And you
Did the shop build the cornice board? I mean, the balance box?
Yes, and that was one cheap. You see, Buse is good at his job. He asked the right question. That was the one piece that was actually legally a prop. So because it was a drapery, but because it was hard and plywood, we decided it would go to the shop. So we got some of the upholstery fabric to the shop to cover the valence boxes and make sure they fitted into the set. They were made out of 3/4 ply and hid
If
some.
if you build them independently of each other, it is guaranteed when you get to the theater, it will be the wrong size, and it will be much more expensive to fix then. And it's very difficult to fix things
if
once
you've got 30 guys not standing around, 30 guys working a put-in on Broadway, you do the math. If that thing missed by 1/2 inch, you've lost 4 hours, at which point they hate you.
I've done lots of like forced perspective draperies on unit sets, and like those kinds of things you really need to have worked out and make sure they fit and look right in the shop before it gets on stage. That's different on Broadway than at more smaller theaters or non-commercial theaters. Labor is very expensive, time is very expensive, and there's not much time. So anything that you can figure out beforehand should have already been figured out.
Right. My rule of thumb is like on Broadway, it's 2/3 labor, 1/3 budget of materials. In a regional theater, it flips. It's usually 2/3 is the material and 1/3 is the labor. So when I'm figuring out things, you heard me before, sometimes in props and in scenery, an expensive item that comes in like the wool carpet, an expensive item that comes in all ready to go is more cost efficient. It costs as much to rewire an antique fixture as it costs to buy it. So, I'm better off. We got new fixtures that looked antique, but were already wired up because, again, that just saves labor and head scratching later.
What I always think of when I think about how expensive labor is, there's a company in California that makes fake tree bark that already looks like tree bark. It's like a tinted latex.
It's great.
It comes in a sheet, but you could like roll it around a tube and it looks like a tree. And it costs like $1 billion. It looks beautiful, but it makes sense when you think of how long it would take to make that kind of texture and get it painted the right way. It can almost be as expensive as it wants to be because it will always be cheaper than having to make it.
Actually, the trunks were made out of tubing and erosion control cloth. I'm from California, so Palm Springs was pretty easy, but the director had a problem with them. He thought they should be Florida palms, and I'm like, no, I'm from California. They should be California palms, but whatever.
You have a lot of arguments about things like that because often the thing that is correct is not what's in people's minds, and sometimes sometimes it's what is believed and not what is actually the truth, a reality of the space.
So I'm Taylor.
I'm Matt.
I'm Alyssa.
And we chose Mary Poppins. And to start us off, for Mary, I found a cute little tea set. It's just a little tea kettle, a little plain white tea kettle, because I feel like she's very pristine and neat. And then there's a little mug that comes with it, and it has good morning and really nice cursive that I feel like she probably would have hand painted. That's what I had for Mary.
For Mary, we created a Google document for this assignment where we brainstormed a bunch of different ideas that we were going to talk about and possibly try to locate in our own homes. This project didn't require us to spend money at all. It was whatever you could find in your house and whatever could fit in your pockets or on your person. So for Mary Poppins, we agreed on a pair of tap shoes. So I took my pair of tap shoes out of the closet. And then the other one.
All right, for Mary, I found a bunch of old, not old, but money that my family had from our trip to England. So here's a little stack of a couple coins that Mary could carry in a coin purse or something. And then I also made this little hanky with her initials on it, and I embroidered her initials. And yeah, it's just a piece of scrap fabric that I cleaned up the edges and embroidered. That's what I have for Mary.
Awesome. Okay, so moving on to Bert. I made several things for Bert because I got very inspired at like 12 a.m. So first I have a little portrait of Mary that he would have. I basically pulled a piece of sketch paper out of my little sketchbook and kind of weathered it with watercolors and stuff like that. And then I kind of crumpled it up a little bit, folded it up multiple times so that it looked like it's been in his pocket for a while. And then I also made a very dirty handkerchief because he's a hardworking man and he would definitely carry something to wipe his brow. Then I also made some old-fashioned little candy wrappers out of scrap muslin and candle wax. So it's kind of got that waxy finish on it. But yeah.
So for Bert, most of us know that he wears a hat almost the entirety of the show. I had an old Newsies hat, which fits the gist of it. There we go. Looks good on Bert. Alyssa, I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, so for Bert, and again, some of the old coins that we had, we gave him a piece that could be his like lucky 10 piece. And then I also found little pieces of chalk that could be left floating around in his pocket. And then I also just grabbed a couple of matchsticks that he could carry around for whatever reason.
Cool. So then finally, Jane was our last character. And I had made a little gum wrapper that also says Bert's Sweet on it. Just like the other one, except it's not as crumpled and so obviously had the candy taken out of it. Yeah.
So we figured too that at some point Jane would have stolen a baseball or something from her brother Michael. So here's an old baseball that I found. Fits perfectly in your pocket.
And then I found a couple coins that she could carry as maybe like leftover from her allowance, or it was a gift from Mary or something, just so she could buy some sweets.
So some other props too that we personally don't have on us, but you'll definitely see pictures of. Mary Poppins, very iconic for having different things that come out of her purse. So you would, one of the biggest things that you would see with Mary Poppins too is her umbrella, very fancy, handled, possibly even carved out of wood, decorative piece.
I've got the Bert's handkerchief. I figured he was a very hardworking man and he'd constantly be wiping his brow. So here I am distressing a rag with watercolors just to make it look more natural, and it's way easier to blend. And this is the final product. And then I moved on to a portrait of Mary that Bert would have had in his pocket. I initially planned on weathering it down, kind of wearing down the paper with watercolors, but then I kind of went overboard and did a full watercolor portrait. And that's the final product. I ended up actually really liking this. And then I moved on to some candy wrappers. I actually got the strategy off of TikTok, off of a sustainable living page, and learned how to make replacement for plastic coverings with beeswax and any kind of cotton fabric. So I'd use that same technique with these kind of vintage looking wrappers. And here's everything all together.
So here we have my family's bucket of coins. And I'm fairly certain in this bag there is some leftover change from our trip to England. So I'm going to see if I can find just a few coins that will work for Mary and maybe some for Jane for a little allowance, and a lucky coin for Bert. We'll see what this is. What was in the little baggie, and so this is not period, so we're gonna take that out. And this one seems a little shiny, so maybe give it to Mary, because she's that to Mary, because it is also a 2 pence, so we can give her 3 2-pence pieces, and I'll give her the 50-pence piece as well, because she's a little she's magical. She's got money. She's got 6 pence for feeding the birds. Let's see, this one is 1 shilling, and this one is also 1 shilling. This is another 2 pence. This is 20 pence. Okay. This is 1 penny. Okay. And I think this is this is another 1 penny. So this is Mary's little stack. We'll give the 1 shilling, this 1 shilling piece to Bert as his lucky 1 shilling. Let's see. We'll give Jane, we're gonna give her 1 shilling and 1 2-pence piece. Here we have our little stacks for each character for Mary and Bert and Jane.
All right, so I found this in my stash of leftover fabrics. It's kind of this nice silky gray, and I thought it would make a nice handkerchief for Mary. So I'm going to clean up the edges a little bit, iron it, and add some embroidery to it.
Hi, my name is Valerie Stebbins and I'm in the design team, and this week we were doing our pocket projects, which is where we get a character and we pick everything that would be in their pockets. This week my group has chose to do Sweeney Todd, and I chose to do the character Sweeney. Such an amazing story. I really love this musical. Sweeney Todd's a really, really cool musical. So for him, I have put all different types of things in his pockets, but I did take the time to make one of them But when I think of Sweeney Todd, you obviously think about the barber in him. But of that time period, barbers were more than just people who cut hair. They were also dentists and even did medical things when needed, which is something that I think is really cool about the time period. But for the one piece that I actually created, I created this little image of his wife that he would be holding. In my brain, it's something that he would keep in his pocket to just like bring with him places. After he got banished, he still had this to remember her, because a lot of things he did was for her throughout the musical. So it's like this image. I took this image. I had this like really cool different like feeling paper, so it's not printer paper, but it feels a little better than that. And then I did a bunch of research, and I found this kind of like illustrated portrait of a woman from the same era. I think she was from France though, but that's all right. So I took this image of her and I printed it out on this piece of paper, and then I took it, and I personally like to teabag things. It gives it more of that like patinaed look. You can also achieve it with watercolor, but I decided to actually do tea bags with it. I went and cut the edges, made it a little rough as if he's been holding it in his hand for a while. This is not fully dry yet, but we're getting there. So that's one of the things that he would have in his pocket, just keeping around with him, a remembrance of something that he really loved. A couple other things that I really wanted to mention that he would also have in his pockets is not just his pockets, but in his bag that he was bringing. He was definitely, in my eyes, holding some type of leather bag that held all of his equipment that he used, especially like his razor and things like that. But his razor is something he'd always keep in his pocket. When looking for a prop for it, we would have to find something within the time period, and also then make sure it's being able to be dulled down and used every single night, so there's extras and there's more of things. But that would be in his pocket. Another thing that he would definitely have in his pocket is some sort of watch, maybe so he can always have the time on him, so his appointments don't arrive at the same time. And he would definitely have a wallet and money in his pocket. Maybe not all the time money, but definitely a wallet, holding all different types of little things people need throughout the day. He, to me, doesn't seem like a man to have too many possessions, besides the things he needs. So that's why it's kind of scarce on what is in his pockets, but at the same time, there's plenty in there. So that's my project. I hope you enjoy some of the process videos and pictures. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
The character I chose to design props for is Miss Lovett. The first prop I decided on was a purse. This was based on some popular designs at the time, and I feel like she would have spent the money to have a nice looking purse.
Would take me to the seaside, August bank holiday. Here, making castles in the sand, I can still feel my toes wiggling around in the briny. By the sea, Mr. Todd, that's the life I carve it. By the sea, Mr. Todd, oh I know you'd love it. You and me, Mr. T, we could be alone.
The second prop is an old recipe card. As a pie shop owner, Miss Lovett may keep a recipe card for her meat pies. I think she might have the recipe to remind her of what really belongs in a pie.
Wouldn't that be smashing down by the sea? I can see us waking, the breakers breaking, the seagulls squawking. I do me baking, then I'd go walking with you here. A seaside wedding could be devised, be rumpled bedding, legit.
The next prop is a locket. Since Miss Levitt is secretly in love with Mr. Todd, I imagine her keeping a locket with a picture of her beloved in her purse. This also means she can keep him by her side at all times.
We've got a nice, respectable business now. Money coming in regular. I'm so happy I could eat you up, I really could. You know what I like to do, Mr. Todd? What I dream, if the business stays as good, well, I'd really like to go in a year or so. Don't you want to know?
Of course.
Do you really want to know?
Yes, I do.
I've always had this dream, ever since I was a skinny little slip of a thing, and my rich Aunt Nettie would take me to the...
And lastly, a coin purse. Since Miss Levitt pies are anything but spectacular, I would imagine her business is not doing great. I imagine her coin purse would only have a few pounds left in it.
Toes wiggling around in the briny. By the sea, Mr. Todd, that's the life I carve it. By the sea, Mr. Todd, oh, I know you'd love it. You and me, Mr. T, we could be alone in a house what we'd almost own, down by the sea, with the fishes splashing. By the sea, wouldn't that be smashing? Down by the sea. I can see us waking, the breakers breaking, the seagulls squawking. I do me baking, then I'd go walking with you here. A seaside wedding could be devised, be rumpled bedding, legit.
So the character that I decided to focus on was Judge Turpin. So originally he arrests and exiles Benjamin Baker to Australia in order to have Baker's wife, Lucy, all to himself. Judge Turpin continuously pursues her. Eventually, he sends his henchmen to bring her to his home. He then rapes Lucy, who tries to kill herself, although she survives. Then Turpin takes Baker's infant daughter, Joanna, as his ward. He spends the whole play pursuing her, until Todd eventually slits his throat at the end, then throws him down a chute to Mrs. Lovett. So for this I focused on a pocket watch, and I originally found this design online, which I thought really liked the intricate gold work here and the sort of font that they're using that's like kind of creepy and old, and this work here with the gold on the inside really worked well with the character of Turpin and with his like rich, greedy kind of mindset. But so I did want to change some of the colors. So I wanted to bring out the gold more and also deepen the greens and add more green to the outside. And also make the gold on the inside more defined and add gold and green here. Because I really think that the combination of gold, like yellowy gold and green, they really like have the connotation of greed and of and of entitlement. And so, in addition to that, I also liked how they have this like sort of sickly look to them, which, you know, is also interesting because he sends Joanna to a mental asylum at one point. So I just thought that was an interesting combination of the colors. And then I also wanted to add the red in because I thought the passion and violent connotations that red is usually connected to also really worked well for this character. And yeah, and the fact that it's a pocket watch, I feel like it's something that you would take out almost, it could be like a compulsion to take out a pocket watch, or a little trinket like that, something that really, like, the colors in it and the design of it really simplify his mind and his mental state, and so I think that works well with his character.
Pretty women, fascinating, sipping coffee, dancing pretty women are a wonder, pretty women, sitting in the
Hello, so I'm Melly.
And I'm Thomas.
And for our pocket prop project, we decided to focus on the secret garden. So first we're gonna just talk about a little bit like our aesthetics and the idea that we had.
So this house to us was really, it was this place that was sort of like spooky. It was dusty. It's the kind of place that no one has loved for a really, really long time. So we wanted that to be the color story at the very beginning of the play. And then as the play goes on, thinking about this idea of more life and more happiness and more love being pumped into the house and into the characters in the story in general. So traveling from this color story of really, really dark woods and really, really rich tones that were almost musty in appearance, to like these bright, vibrant flowers that we start to see in the garden, and these bright colors and patterns and textures that really provide significant contrast to sort of create like a visual arc to the story.
Yeah, and to touch on the whole thing with the flowers, we thought that one, it would be best to have the flowers be the most whimsical and the most colorful part of the story, almost to be unreal, so to be fantastic, because this garden is a place where magic happens. But another thing that we thought would be really interesting for the flowers is to have them be made out of paper, to sort of represent, there's like a very large theme in the show about rejuvenation, and also about how even if something seems like it's past, like you can't make it work, if it has a wick, if it has that spark, if you like have that hope, it can grow and it can become something beautiful. And we just thought that it would be really cool to play on the idea of having the characters actually fold and make the paper flowers on stage to show that growth in action. So first, I'm going to talk about my character, Mary Lennox. She's a 10-year-old girl, and what I thought she would have. So her container that she'd have would be a basket. I assumed that all the props that Mary would have in said basket would be things that she'd be bringing to show Colin, who is her friend. So here are my found props. So the found props that I had, so it's mentioned in the show that she has a music box that she brings in, she shows Colin. I really liked this specific music box because one, we really wanted to play on the dark woods of things that you would find in a house. And also the picture on the music box itself reminded me a little bit of like how I envisioned Lily to look like in the secret garden. So I could foresee Mary finding this just in some room and being like, oh my gosh, Colin would love to see that. So another found prop that I have is the key to the actual garden itself. So the garden has been locked up. And so in this time period in 1910, it was very popular to have skeleton keys, and in a manner of this sorts, I could foresee them having a very ornate type key. So I chose this key partially because I found it in an old house, and I have looked for years trying to figure out what it unlocks, and I can never figure it out. So perhaps it's the secret garden. I also chose this key because I just really loved the fact that it looks ornate, but it also is a little dusty. It looks like it could use some cleaning, and I think that really fit the aesthetic of our show. And then finally, of the found props, it's always mentioned that Mary is walking with a candle. And in 1910, the candle that you would have would probably have a candle holder so she wouldn't burn herself on the wax. But I really specifically like this candle holder because it looks like something that she just stole from a room, and that she'd been using it a lot because she did, there's like wax dripping down the side of the candle. And I also really liked the look of the metal. It looks old. It looks like it could use some polishing. So I thought that really fit our aesthetic. So now we're on to the props that I made. So first, Mary started the story in India, and she ended up being relocated to the manor. And the only thing that she took with her from India was a picture frame that included a small picture of Lily in the garden, specifically sitting on a branch. At the end of that scene, it is mentioned that there is a fire. So I thought that the picture frame would have gotten some fire damage. So what I did is that I took a silver picture frame and I wiped it down or with a sandpaper, and then I burnt the actual glass underneath the candle to give it that sooty tarnished type look, and then it actually shattered under the heat of the flame, and I thought that that made it more realistic that it had fire damage. I then drew just a really quick drawing of what I saw Lily looking like, and then I put it inside, and here is what that looks like all together. And another one that I made was Lily is given a bag of seeds of flowers, specifically poppies. So I could foresee this bag being homemade, not being anything fancy, and Mary grabbing it and being like, this is ugly, I want to make this look pretty, and not having access to paints. So taking berries and putting cornstarch in them, which is what I did to create the pigments that I used, and painting on it with her finger to create like a flower type look on the bag because it is seeds for flowers. So that's actually what I did. And this is how it came out. The picture on the right is a picture of the bag painting still drying from the berry pigments. Then the picture on the left is it all dried. And then finally, for her basket, I think the thing that she would want to be showing Colin the most is the flowers that they had been planting, almost even bringing him a bouquet of flowers. My inspiration for the basket and her carrying the flowers within the basket were these pictures that I found of like historical artwork. So I decided to make a bouquet of paper roses because roses were very special in the show. Particularly, we thought that it would be good to have yellow paper roses. So, because yellow roses represent friendship, and that's like really important to these two characters. They have a really strong bond and a really strong friendship. So one rose she would be giving to Colin, then one rose she'd be keeping herself. So that's why she has 2 yellow roses. So this was just how I created the paper roses, just by cutting up paper and gluing them together with a stem and then painting a little bit to give it some depth. And this is what these flowers look like after they were all finished and they were put inside the basket. I really wanted some vibrant colors, as I mentioned earlier, because these roses are almost fantastical. They're just the most beautiful, colorful roses you've ever seen. So I really liked the brightness that they had.
So I designed the props for Colin, and Colin is also 10 years old, and I thought a lot about what the things that he would actually have, because Colin spends almost the entirety of the show locked in his bedroom with very few things. So I thought a lot about, what are the kinds of things that Colin was given, what are the kinds of things that he found, and what were the kinds of things that he would have made for himself. So for his container, I chose to use a red handkerchief. These are used throughout the show to symbolize when somebody dies, whether it be in a flashback or in a dream sequence. And since Colin is on death's door for a good portion of the show, I decided that it would be appropriate. It also reminded me of sort of like that 1960s cartoon hobo image where they carry all of their belongings in like a little red bandana on a stick. And because a lot of the props that I chose are symbolic of is his hopes and his dreams and his childhood, I decided that these are things like emotional baggage that he would carry with him for the entirety of his life. Hence the reason I chose something that would be mobile. So Colin has inside a music box, a rosebud, a sock puppet, a syringe, and what I call his adventure book. So first prop was the music box, and this is, like Melly said, one of the first things that Mary gave to Colin. I chose this one because of, again, the dark wood. It's sort of got that sort of rustic yet still elegant vibe to it. And when you look at it, it looks very simple until you start to really inspect the intricate detailing in the middle, and there actually is a slight crack, and you can see some nicks around the top of the box, which I think really symbolizes Colin. He's, maybe simple at first glance, but when you really start to get to know him, you start to see the depth of his character and how he's been hurt and how he's been broken. Next, I have the rose. Like Melly said, we chose a yellow rose to symbolize the friendship between Mary and Colin. We didn't choose pink or red because the rose is already symbolic of his mom and the love that he has for her, and roses themselves have that connotation to them. So choosing red or pink would be a bit redundant in that sense, but the yellow really ties Mary in, since she is the one that finds the garden again and sort of rekindles everyone's appreciation for this garden. It also symbolizes the fact that Colin and Mary really are the light in each other's lives right now. They are sort of what keep each other going. We see that, when Colin gets so depressed that he thought that Mary would leave him and not come back to see him again. I think the rose also sort of, because it is such a delicate flower, it symbolizes how fragile Colin is. The next prop is Albert, which is a friend that Colin, I think, would have made for himself. There's a moment in the script where the doctor mentions that Colin can't have lots of material things because of how they could endanger his health. So this is the kind of thing that Colin might have made out of a sock and some newspaper and maybe a button or a bead from a cardigan in his wardrobe. This is something that I made actually in my bedroom. These are all things that I could find in my own space. And it was really important to me that it was a sock puppet because, you couldn't put your hand in it and make a sock puppet talk. So not only does Colin have someone to talk to, he has someone that will talk back to him, as in respond to him. And we talked about Colin's fragility. Because Colin is the one making the mouth move, he has full control over what Albert's saying. So he's never going to be hurt by his friend. And, we see that, Albert serves a purpose up until he meets Mary and finally finds his first human friend. I also chose to make a syringe for Colin because, there's that first scene where Mary meets Colin and we see him getting sedated and medicated, and he really, really doesn't like it. And I think this is the kind of thing that if the doctor had ever left a syringe on the table next to Colin's bed before administering the medication, I think Colin would have taken it and hidden it just to avoid getting his dose of medicine. And I chose not to tarnish this one in any way because I think it symbolizes not only the fact that, a medical instrument probably should be clean, but also the fact that the doctor is kind of the imposter here. Although he is Archibald's brother, he is sort of like the third party, and it sort of, the fact that the syringe is so clean in this dusty house sort of emphasizes the fact that the doctor really doesn't quite fit in with the status quo, and he's the one that's trying to make these drastic changes in the manor. Finally, I made Colin his adventure book. Colin loves books. He loves having stories read to him. He loves to dream. So I decided that he would have had a book, but I didn't think that he would have been given one again. I think the doctor would have decided that would have been detrimental to his physical health. So I decided that Colin would have made one out of records that the doctor left. That's what all the pen text is on that left-hand side of that left image. It's records that Colin has taken and actually done like a rip technique to get the paper down to maximize the number of sheets in his book while still having a good size booklet. So that's why I chose not to use scissors, because Colin wouldn't have had any scissors. I decided that Colin would be able to write his name, but really not much more. So the font and the word adventures is actually copied off of a book called The Adventures of Maya the Bee, which was a really popular book in that time period that somebody might have read to Colin and might have accidentally left in his room, that Colin might have scribbled down the word adventures, not necessarily knowing the true definition, but knowing that it meant something exciting and a journey and a place to escape the life that he was living. And then on the next slide, there are all these little images that Colin would have drawn. I tried to make them look as much like a child's drawing as possible. And this story is the one that Archibald reads him in Race You to the Top of the Morning. So not only is this a cute story that his father used to read to him. But I think there's actually some metaphor in here of Archibald being the knight and the doctor being the dragon, and Archibald fighting to save Colin, who is symbolized as the princess in the tower, and sort of deliver him to this new life and, give him all the love that he deserves, and being forced into this rabbit hole. And then finally, there is a picture. This is a color image, because color photography was actually around in the time period, and sort of going with that theme of having everything become full color by the end of the show. I wanted to include a picture of Colin and Archibald that I thought represented them really, really well in full color by the end of the show. Obviously, this is not what Colin and Archibald would have looked like. This is not a period photograph from 1910. But one of the things that I learned as an actor is that it's really, really important to have a clear image of what your character is going to look like and how your audience needs to see them. And to me, this is what Colin and Archibald look like. And it does a really, really good job for me capturing the vibe of their relationship and how it's rekindled through the arc of the story and finding themselves in the magic garden at the end.
Maybe not a life like you and me, but somewhere there's a secret streak of green inside. Now come and let me show you what I mean. When a thing is weak, it has a light around me. Maybe not a light that you can see, but hiding down below was once asleep inside it, just waiting for the right time to be seen. You clear away the dead parts so the tender ones can form. Loosen up the earth and let the roots get warm. Let the roots get warm. When a thing is weak, it has a way of knowing. When it's safe to grow again, you will see. With sun and water sweet enough to feed, it will climb up through the earth up into green. You clear away the dead parts so the tender buds can form. Loosen up the earth and let the roots get warm. Let the roots get warm. Come on, violet, come on, warm place. On the snow, I'm growing up. Once upon a time.
Once upon a time,
in a quarantined land,
there lived two designers.
Hi, I'm Maddie Boshin.
Hi, I'm Katie.
And for this week, we were tasked with looking into what the inside of a character's bag might be filled with.
And we chose the show Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim.
I chose the character Little Red Riding Hood.
And I chose Cinderella. If you know Into the Woods, you know that Act 1 is more of the fairy tale, happily ever after, but Act 2 is what happens after happily ever after. So that's why we chose to do what our characters' bags would look like in Act 1 and Act 2.
Alright, so the character that I chose was Little Red, and this is her basket. So in Act 1, Little Red is going to her granny's house. She is bringing her some bread that she stole from the bakers because she's a child, and she steals sweets from them and is always snacking. So this is the bread that would be in her basket. As clearly she's been snacking. There's little bites taken out of it. She also stopped and picked some flowers for her granny on the way. Like most little kids, she's very distracted by the things that she sees along the way, and of course, kind of coerced by the wolf to pick them for her as a distraction. So I thought that maybe she would be using her hair ribbon to tie them up for her granny, because it's just what she had on hand. There's also some berries in there that I think maybe she might have picked along the way. It seems like she's always hungry, always looking for a snack along the way. And that's her in Act 1.
In the beginning of the show, Cinderella, like the other stories of Cinderella, she serves her stepsisters and her stepmother. She cooks, she cleans, she shops for the family, she's overworked, and she's treated like a housemaid. So for Cinderella's purse, I didn't think it'd be anything too grand. It's probably a purse that was passed down or found somewhere very cheap, found on her own maybe. Something that more of a peasant would use. And when I was looking online, I looked up satchels, old satchels, worn down satchels, and I found this one, and it actually reminded me of a purse that I have myself. So for Cinderella's bag, I thought she would carry around a purse that looks like this. It looked more satchel-like if it wasn't my own purse. I would definitely make the leather look a little bit more worn down, maybe put a few holes in it, make it look more dirty, like it's been through a lot. It's a good size satchel. When you're walking around the woods, you can wear it like this. When you're walking around the market, you can wear it like this. But it's very roomy. It has enough storage with pockets and flaps and all sorts of places to put things that Cinderella would need in her day-to-day life. So the first thing that's in Cinderella's bag is 2 spools of thread and a needle and a pair of scissors. So I decided to put these in Cinderella's purse because throughout the day, if she's ever out with the step family and one of the stepsisters starts a fight with the other one and it ends up in a whole thing and one of their dresses get ripped, I am sure, 100% certain, that the stepsisters would demand that Cinderella fix it right then and there so that they didn't look like a fool running around the town. So Cinderella would take these 2 spools of thread, black and white for any color that they could be wearing that day, and she would have these ready to go to fix whatever needed to be fixed, and scissors to fix anything as well. Now the next thing that I think that Cinderella would be carrying around is a coin purse, or a coin can sort of thing. When I was trying to look up what a coin purse would look like, I found this one. It looked like a bag. I liked it, but then when I was looking for the thread and my scissors, I actually found this box. So it's just a little tin box. It's got a butterfly and these little designs over it. It looks old and beat up. And I thought, what if this was a coin box that her mother gave her? So I think that her carrying this around, if it was from her mother, would mean a lot to her. And inside of it, she would hold all the coins that she uses to go buy things in the market, and maybe even a few cool things that she finds on the ground when she's walking through the woods. I think she's a very curious person as well. And she wants to get to know the world because she's so shut inside her own house all the time, cooking and cleaning for other people, that she would want something to contain those little treasures that she finds while she's out. And the last thing that I think Cinderella would have in her purse is a journal. Now, this is a journal that's mine. It's leather, it looks very worn, and I just think it would be perfect for Cinderella because she's a person that goes through so much every single day. If I were in her shoes, I would need something to let out my emotions, my frustration, sadness, anything and everything. In Act 2, we see Cinderella as a princess, and then when the giant comes and attacks the land again, she is told by her friends, who are birds, that her mother's grave has been destroyed. So she decides to disguise herself as her former self, the peasant version of Cinderella, and she goes to see her mother's grave. And the baker comes and finds her and finds out that it's actually her. She then decides to join them in their hunt for the giant. In Act 2, as a princess, I feel that Cinderella would have this box in her room in the castle that held all of her old, or most of her old things from when she was living with her family. So I feel like the purse that she would have in Act 2 is still her bag, her satchel. It's probably got a little bit of dust on it now because it hasn't been used in a while since she's been a princess. And when she leaves the castle, I'm not sure if she really had the intent of ever going back. I feel like she was kind of getting to know that the princess life wasn't really for her, and I think that when she left the castle to go see her mother's grave, I think she might have been intending on it being her last time being in the castle, so she took just about everything that she could in her bag again. And so what she takes with her is her journal, of course, filled with her memories, and also with the pages that are blank, she's able to write down all the new experiences she's about to have in Act 2 when she finds the time. And what we also have again is her little box. Again, I think she really is a sentimental caring person. So she would keep this box still by her mother, and I think that she would find whatever coins that she could in the palace in her room and take them all and put them all in here, so that she was basically set for life, sort of. Or maybe her jewelry or something like that. Not necessarily stealing, but taking what she would need to live on her own and find her own adventure. And lastly, this is something that she would find during Act 2. I think that during Act 2 she would make her way back to her original house, and I think that she realizes that the time that they're in now is very dangerous with giants running about, and I think she's someone who would want to be prepared to help anyone. So, what I found, right now these are my masks, but instead these kind of remind me of the types of fabric that would be used in this time period, just simple and cotton and very plain. I think she would have gone back to her old house and had rummaged through everything trying to find her old clothes. I think she would have ripped them apart and put them in her bag to keep as bandages. Bandages or fabric to be tied into like a wrap to hold a broken arm up, because I think she's someone who is very caring and wants to protect people and wants to be prepared for anything, especially in this dangerous time. And that concludes my portion of what would be in Cinderella's bag. I hope you all enjoyed watching this, and I hope that my character analysis and my character description and what I think of her really helps you to understand why I would put these things in Cinderella's bag and why I think that she would have these items on her throughout the show.
In Act 2, she obviously has the addition of her knife that her granny gives her to protect herself from the things that could be in the woods, especially since they were just eaten by a wolf. And I think that in Act 2, instead of stealing treats from the baker, she might progress to making her own for her granny. So I have this recipe card that maybe she was bringing to her granny's house, or bringing to her own house to make some treats for her. So I hope that you've enjoyed our look into the two character bags that we explored today, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Backstage is part of our larger programming, Digital Clock. Digital Clock is made possible by a generous gift from Phil and Liz Gross. If you'd like to learn more about our programming or how you can become a supporter, visit us at collegelightoperacompany.com. Tune in again next week for another installment of Backstage.